Hi, everyone. We're back, and this is our final chapters of Wish. When we last left Charlie, she had had a visit from her sister, Jackie, and everybody, of course, loved Jackie, and she just made herself at home. And um, Charlie just goes on about how she wishes she could be more like Jackie and that she could have her life back in Raleigh. But Jackie kind of reinforces that this may not happen. So we're going to find out about Charlie and her wish. Chapter 24. The week after Jackie left, I started vacation Bible school at Rocky Creek Baptist Church. I told Bertha I didn't want to go, but she kept telling me how much I was going to love it. I went to vacation Bible school every summer when I was a girl, she said. I loved everything about it, the games, the crafts, the songs. She went on to tell me about making a bird feeder by putting peanut butter on a pine cone and rolling it in birdseed. And lanyards. I must have made about 100 lanyards. She laughed and shook her head. And macrame keychains. I loved those. And, she said, Howard and all the kids from Sunday school will be there. So I finally said okay, but the day before I was supposed to go, Bertha came home with a lunchbox covered with ponies and rainbows. I can't believe I let you take your lunch to school in an ugly old paper bag, she said. I can't take that, I said. Bertha's smile faded. Oh, she said. Okay. I could tell I had hurt her feelings, but there was no way I could take that lunchbox. Bertha snatched it off the kitchen counter and stuck it up on the top shelf of the cupboard. I don't know what I was thinking, she said. That thing is just plumb silly. So she put my lunch in a brown paper bag and off I went to Vacation Bible School. We sat in a circle in the shade and listened to Miss Rhonda tell us how much fun we were going to have. Even though we knew each other from Sunday school, she said, First, I'd like for each of y'all to tell us your name and then 3 fun facts about yourself. Right away, I thought about my first day of school in Colby and that getting to know you paper. But this time, when it was my turn, instead of saying I liked soccer, ballet, and fighting, I said, I have a dog named Wishbone. My sister works at the Waffle House. My Aunt Bertha has 7 cats. We spent the morning making paper mache bulls and singing a song about Moses in the bulrushes. When it was time for lunch, I got my brown paper bag and sat next to Audrey Mitchell. I'd made up my mind. I was going to be more like Jackie from now on. Cool and confident, making friends right and left. But before I could think up anything to say to Audrey, Howard plopped down next to me. Burl wrote Jackie a letter, he said. What for? He shrugged. Lenny snatched it right out of his hand and they got in a fight. Burl chased him around the house, cussing and broke a lamp. He lifted the corner of his sandwich and examined the bologna and mustard inside. Did Burl get the letter back? I asked. Howard flattened his sandwich between the palms of his hands. Yeah, he said, but it got ripped, and now they're both grounded because of the cussin' and the lamp. He pushed at his damp red hair. His arms were sunburned bright pink and dotted with freckles. He went on to tell me about Dwight breaking his pinky finger at baseball camp. While Howard talked, I watched Audrey out of the corner of my eye. She sat cross legged with a paper napkin on her lap. She had butterfly barrettes in her hair, and her sneakers didn't have one speck of dirt on them. Her lunch box was plain, no ponies or rainbows on it. She opened it and peered inside. Then she took out a plastic bag full of grapes, something wrapped in foil, and a folded up piece of paper. I scooted a little closer to her and pretended like I was listening to Howard while she opened the paper. It was a note with big, swirly handwriting. When she put it down on the grass next to her grapes, I squinted at it, trying to read it. And Cotton had 2 ticks on him, Howard was saying, so Mama made him strip down naked right there in the yard. A couple of the kids giggled, and I shot Howard a look. Nobody wanted to hear the word naked while they ate their lunch. But Howard went right on talking like he didn't even notice. Just then, some girl I didn't know said, Sit here, Audrey, and patted the ground next to her. So Audrey scooped up her grapes and stuff and moved away from me and Howard, leaving that piece of paper behind. Right away, I slapped my foot down on top of it. While Audrey and that girl chatted away about swimming lessons and soccer camp, I snatched up the paper and stuffed it in my pocket. What was that? Howard asked. What was what? That paper. What paper? That paper in your pocket. Nothing. Howard wiped a dab of mustard on his shorts. Okay, he said. All afternoon, while he read Bible stories out loud and watched Miss Rhonda's teenage son do magic tricks, I thought about that note in my pocket. Every once in a while, I reached in and wrapped my fingers around it. Finally, I got my chance. Howard was helping Miss Rhonda take the Bible storybooks back into the church, and Audrey was busy being friends with everybody but me. So I took that paper out of my pocket and read it. Have fun at Vacation Bible School. I will be missing you. I love you very much. Mama. I quickly folded it up and jammed it back into my pocket. I looked over at Audrey linking arms with some girl and whispering. I closed my eyes, and in my mind I became Audrey, a girl with perfect sneakers and a friend to whisper secrets to, and a mama who wrote, I love you very much on a note for me. But when I opened my eyes, and I was me again. That night we had corn on the cob for supper. I counted the rows of corn on my cob, and I couldn't believe it. Exactly 14. That was on my list of things you can wish on. I counted one more time to make sure, and then I closed my eyes and made my wish. Oh, I almost forgot, Bertha said, jumping up from the table. She took something off the counter and handed it to me. A lunchbox. Sorry, had to let my dog out and tip the stool over. A lunchbox, a plain lunchbox with no ponies or rainbows. She shifted her eyebrows and said, What do you think? Better? A wave of guilt swept over me and caught me by surprise. I felt bad that Bertha had spent money to buy another lunchbox for me. I should have just taken the one with rainbows and ponies and been thankful for it. I bet Jackie would have, but I hadn't, and now here was Bertha being so nice to me. Yes, ma'am, I said, thank you. Then we went out on the porch and tossed a tennis ball to Wishbone till he got tired and went to sleep at my feet. As I watched the sun sink slowly behind the mountain, I cupped my hand around that note in my pocket. I thought about Audrey's mother putting those grapes in that little bag and writing that note. I wondered what Audrey's family was like, the one she had written on her flower for the Garden of Blessings at church. I knew for sure her daddy wasn't away somewhere getting corrected, and I bet she had a sister who played cards with her on rainy days and whispered secrets under the covers at night. And I was certain her mama had her feet on the ground. When it got dark and the mosquitoes came out, me and Wishbone went back to my room. I fished around in my backpack until I found a piece of paper and a pen. I tore the paper in half and sat on the floor and wrote, I love you very much, Mama. Then I folded the paper up and tucked it under my pillow before turning out the light and kissing Wishbone on the top of the head. Chapter 25. The next day at Bible school, we made bottle cap magnets with the 10 Commandments on them. Then we played some game where we had to wrap ourselves in strips of crepe paper like Joshua's coat of many colors and race around an obstacle course. I guess Miss Rhonda didn't remember about Howard and his up-down walk when she thought up that game. He came in last and ripped his coat of many colors, but he didn't seem to care. At lunch, we sat in the shade and took out our lunch boxes. Howard was helping Miss Rhonda gather up all the crepe paper strips, so I plopped myself down next to Audrey. Hey, I said. Hey, Audrey said, and then she scooted closer to the girl named Lanny, who had scabs all over her legs. I couldn't believe she'd rather sit closer to a scabby-legged girl than me, but I guess she did. I told her I was sorry about her kicking and shoving, hadn't I? I didn't know what else I could do to make friends with her. I opened my new lunchbox and took out the things that Bertha had packed for me. A bagel with peanut butter, strawberries in a margarine tub, some cookies she made that were kind of burnt on the bottom. Then I took out the note that I had written the night before, the one that said, I love you very much, Mama. I opened it and held it out in front of me. Then I cleared my throat so maybe Audrey would look at my way and see that paper, but she was busy stirring her yogurt. So I tossed the paper on the grass almost in front of her. You dropped your trash, she said. What? That's your trash. She pointed to the paper. You mean that note? She shrugged. Whatever. It's from my mama, I said, rolling my eyes. She's all she's all the time doing that. I nudged the paper a little closer to her so maybe she would read it. I thought you lived with your aunt and uncle, she said. Well, not all the time. I mean, most of the time, but my mama comes to visit a lot and she's always writing these notes. I knew my face was beet red, so I kept my eyes on the ground. Audrey made a face. You're not supposed to lie at vacation Bible school, she said. She said the word Bible real loud and mean sounding. Before I knew it, I was standing over her with my fists balled up and my heart beating like crazy. I felt red hot anger settle over me like a blanket. I wanted to stomp on her perfect sneakers. I wanted to yank those butterfly barrettes out of her hair. But then Howard came up from behind me saying, can you guess? Pineapple, pineapple, pineapple. Audrey grabbed her yogurt and lunchbox and stood up. Y'all are crazy, she said, and stormed off toward the church. What the heck, Charlie? Howard said. You gonna smack somebody at church? I dropped back down to the grass and began throwing my bagel and stuff into my lunchbox. Howard sat beside me. Why are you so mad? She said I lied. Did you? No. I snatched that stupid note up and tossed it into the lunchbox. He looked at me over the top of his glasses, the way some old grown-up would. Then no reason to get mad. He peered into my lunchbox. Are you going to eat that bagel? It took me a while to simmer down, but I finally did. Sure, I wasn't in the mood to memorize Bible verses. When it was almost time to go home, Miss Rhonda told us to go inside and help set up the chairs for Sunday school. As Howard made his way toward the church, T.J. Rainey followed behind him, walking in an up-down way like Howard. He looked around to make sure everybody was watching, a big old grin on his face like he was the funniest person in the universe. Suddenly, Howard turned around, but T.J. didn't even stop. He kept walking toward Howard, up, down, down. And then I couldn't believe my eyes. Howard just turned back around and went on his way like nothing had ever happened. Well, I can tell you for sure there weren't enough pineapples in the world to keep me from running straight at TJ full steam ahead. I kept my arms stiff in front of me and bam! I shoved him so hard that his head snapped back and he crashed face first into the dirt. I confess I was more than a little surprised when he got right up and shoved me back, knocking me to the ground. I stumbled to my feet and was ready to haul off and bust him when Miss Rhonda stepped between me and TJ with her fist jammed into her waist and a lot of pure horror on her face. Stop it right now, she hollered. This is not Bible school behavior. So that's how I ended up sitting on a church pew with TJ Rainey, listening to Miss Rhonda talk about forgiveness and kindness and goodness and grace and all that stuff. It seemed to me like Audrey Mitchell ought to be sitting here in her perfect sneakers while Miss Rhonda quoted some stuff about doing unto others. Every once in a while, TJ shot me a glare, and I shot one right back. When Bertha came to pick me up, Miss Rhonda had to go and tell her what happened. Bertha nodded and said, "Oh, dear," and "Yes, ma'am," and "I will." And then we rode home in silence. Mama would have been hollering at me, asking me what in the world was wrong with me. And can't I go one darn day without causing trouble? But not Bertha. She reached over and patted my knee and said, "You are a good friend to Howard, Charlie." When we got home, me and Wishbone went out front and sat in the shade of the dogwood tree. The air was still and hot. The red dirt yard dry and dusty. Bertha's nasturtiums on the front door spilled over the side of the flower pots and drooped onto the ground. The sprinkler sputtered in circles out in the garden, leaving glistening drops of water dripping off the okra and settling into little pools inside the yellow flowers of the cucumber plants. When I'd first gotten to Colby, most of that garden had just been rows of teeny tiny green plants poking out of the ground. But now plump red tomatoes grew fatter every day. Yellow flowers turned into bright green zucchini, and pole beans hung in clusters from vines that snaked up, twined to form leafy teepees. A blue jay landed in the yard near us, and Wishbone's ears perked up. He cocked his head and watched that bird hop in and out of the marigolds along the fence. I put my arm around him and rubbed his leg, velvety ears between my fingers. He licked my face, His tail swished back and forth on the dusty ground. I swear that that dog loves you to pieces, Bertha kept telling me. And I do believe it was true. He'd gotten to where he wouldn't let me out of his sight, following me around from one room to another, laying by my chair at the kitchen table, sleeping with his head on my feet out on the porch. I didn't even need to keep him on a leash out in the yard anymore. He stayed right by my side everywhere I went. He might trot over to sniff a shrub or snap at the bumblebees over on the clover by the porch, but he always glanced back to make sure I was still there, and every time he did that, I loved him more. After a while, Bertha came outside and brought us saltine crackers with peanut butter. She let Wishbone eat right off of her hand and didn't even care when he slobbered on her. Then, out of the clear blue, she said, "Charlie, I really admire you for sticking up for Howard like you did today." Admired me? Well, that was a first. I was sure nobody on earth had ever admired me before. "You do?" I said. She nodded. "I do." And so we sat there in the shade of the dogwood while the sun beat down on the dirt yard. Bertha told me a story about when she and Mama were little girls and went to a lake one summer. Carla had never been in water deeper than a bathtub in her life, Bertha said. So when she fell off the dock and into that murky water, everybody went crazy. But I swear she popped right up like a cork without so much as a sputter, and then she just floated on her back, staring up at the sky while everybody ran up and down the dock, hollering and carrying on. And my Uncle Jared jumped in after her and ruined his brand new wristwatch. Bertha chuckled and swatted at gnats that were hovering over Wishbone as he slept. "That girl was a walking wonder sometimes," she said. Of course, I couldn't help but ask myself how a woman who can't get out of bed and get her feet on the ground could be a walking wonder, but I was still basking in the glow of being admired. So for once, I kept quiet and didn't mess anything up. And one time, Bertha went on, she snipped all the buttons off my blouses. She cut the air with her finger like scissors. Snip, 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 right off onto the floor. Why'd she do that? "Beats the heck out of me," she said. "She did the craziest things you ever saw." She reached over suddenly and grabbed my knee. Well, not crazy, but just, kind of, like odd. She let go of my knee and went back to swatting gnats away from Wishbone. About the only thing I remember our poor mama ever saying was, "Carla, stop that." I nodded. I had a perfect picture in my mind of little Carla snipping those buttons. Snip, snip, snip. Before long, Gus's car came bouncing and squeaking up the gravel road. "Hey, Butterbean," he called out the window. Then he got out, kissed Bertha on the cheek, patted Wishbone on the head, and told me I was a ray of sunshine at the end of a long, sorry day. That night in bed, I laid on top of the cool sheets with Wishbone's soft, warm body next to me. I thought about my broken family back in Raleigh and wondered if they were thinking about me, a ray of sunshine at the end of a long, sorry day. Chapter 26. "What's that?" Audrey Mitchell pointed to my hand as we played Bible bingo in the fellowship hall. It had been raining all morning, so we hadn't been able to go outside and have a balloon race like Miss Rhonda had planned us to do. I looked down at the drawing I had done on the back of my hand with a pen. "A blackbird in a cage," I said, flipping my hair the way Jackie flips her. Audrey screwed up her face like she'd just seen a dead possum squashed flat in the middle of the road. "Check it out," I said, thrusting my hand toward her face and winking. I'd been trying to do all the things Jackie does, flipping my hair and winking, acting cool and confident, but so far it didn't seem to be working. Most of those kids at Bible school still treated me like I had cooties. "What's it for?" Audrey said. And then the darndest thing happened. I guess being a ray of sunshine had given me real confidence. Not pretend confidence, because I looked her square in the eye and said, "It's the same as the tattoo my daddy has on his hand." The minute those confident words came out, old Mr. Doubt tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Now look what you've done. She's going to ask you where your daddy is, and then what are you going to say?" But miracle of miracles, Audrey did not ask me where my daddy was. She just said, "Oh," and studied her Bible bingo cards. So I pushed Mr. Dowd aside and said, "His name is Scrappy, and he's getting corrected." Audrey put another token on her bingo card. "What does that mean?" she asked. "Means he's getting corrected," I said. "He'll be home any day now." "So then, are you going back to Raleigh?" she said. At that, Howard's head shot up from studying his bingo cards and he stared at me. Yeah, I said, "Sure." "When?" Howard said. I shrugged. "I don't know. However long it takes for Scrappy to get corrected, I guess." Suddenly, my confidence began to spin out of control, faster and faster, till it rose right up through the ceiling and out of the roof of Rocky Creek Baptist Church, disappearing into the sky and leaving me there in the fellowship hall with a stomach ache. I licked my thumb and wiped at that blackbird tattoo, leaving a smudgy black spot on my hand. Suddenly, somebody yelled, "Bingo!" and Miss Rhonda clapped her hands and pointed to the table full of prizes, coloring books and glittery pens and erasers shaped like Noah's Ark. "Clear your cards," Miss Rhonda said. "Let's start a new game." Later that day, me and Howard sat at on the Odom's front porch steps, watching Wishbone and Cotton playing in the sprinkler. Cotton jumped over puddles of muddy water while Wishbone scampered along behind him, ears flapping and tail wagging. "I've been wondering about something," Howard said, scratching at mosquito bites on his freckled leg. "How come you shoved TJ at Bible school yesterday?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, why did you shove him?" "He was making fun of you, Howard." "I know." I stared at him. His eyebrows were squeezed together over his glasses, and he looked so serious. For a minute, I almost laughed. But then he said, "He was making fun of me, not you." "Then you're the one who should have shoved him," I said. "Nah." "Why not?" I said. "Why do you let kids make fun of you and don't do darn things like about that and don't do a darn thing about it?" "'Cause I'd be shoving somebody every day of my life." "So?" "So, what good is that?" We sat in silence for a minute. Cotton was stomping in the mud, and Wishbone was snapping at the water swirling out of the sprinkler. "But why'd you shove TJ?" Howard asked. "Because he was being mean to you." I wiped muddy water off my legs. "Duh," I added. "Why do you care about that?" "'Cause you're my friend," I said. "I don't like kids to be mean to my friends, okay?" "I'm your friend?" "You sure are," I said. "Duh," I added again. "I am?" "Well, yeah." "Then my wish came true." "It did?" "Yeah." Howard blushed a little, but his white freckly face turning pale pink. "Well, part of it, anyway. I wished for two things. So since one of 'em has come true, I can tell it to you. I wish that we'd be friends." "Well, dang. I never would have guessed that. You'd think that a red-headed boy with glasses who was named Howard and had an up-down walk would have a lot more wishes for me for would have a lot more wishes to wish for than being friends with me. But I admit, I felt a smile on my face and hope in my heart because maybe wishes really do come true. Maybe some wishes just take longer than others. Chapter 27. The next day after Bible school, Wishbone and I were sitting out front while Gus worked in the garden. Tiny wrens and sparrows hopped around the yard and fluttered up to the bird feeder on the fence post. After a while, Bertha came out with a couple of cats trailing along behind her. She smelled like lavender, and I couldn't help but notice how much she looked like Mama, with her hair curling around her face and her eyes crinkled up at the edges. I figured she was going to tell me a story about some lady in her knitting group or something, but she said, "I found that note." My stomach squeezed up and I felt kind of scared for a minute. Um, that note in your lunchbox, she said. Well, what in the world could I say now? I felt like a big dumb baby for writing that note. I wanted Bertha to go away. I did not want to talk about that note. But Bertha did not go away. She sat petting the cat, purring in her lap, and gazing out at Gus, weeding in the garden. And then she said, "You know, Charlie, me and Gus always wanted children." She rubbed Wishbone's belly with her bare foot. "We have had many blessings in our lifetime, but having children has not been one of them. So, I watched her foot rubbing Wishbone and waited. "Well," she said, "I guess I'm just too good at doing things that mothers do. I guess I'm just not too good at doing things that mothers do. My heart sank and I scrambled to think of something to say, but I couldn't. When I saw that note, I wanted to kick myself, she went on. How come I didn't think how much a little girl would love a note like that in her lunchbox? I wished, like anything, I had thought to do that, but I didn't. Just like I didn't think how silly that rainbow lunchbox was. And then there was her hand on my knee. It was dark and tan from hours in the sun, fingernails rough and dirty from pulling weeds in the garden. So, I hope you'll be patient with me while I learn, she said. I hung my head and nodded. I should have said something nice to her. I should have said, "Oh, don't even worry about it. That rainbow lunch box was no big deal." I should have said, "I don't even care about that dumb note." But the truth was, all I could do was sit there feeling her warm hand and breathing her lavender smell. "Let's go help Gus," she said. So the three of us pulled weeds and picked beans and pinched dead flowers off the marigolds. Wishbone sat outside the gate and whined to get in, but he wasn't allowed because of his digging. When we were done, we climbed into Gus's car and picked up Howard before heading down the mountain to get ice cream. Wishbone stuck his head out of the window, his ears flapping like crazy in the wind, while me and Howard sang school songs. Every once in a while, we passed a clearing with a view of mountains stretched out as far as you could see. A smoky blue haze floated over the treetops. It reminded me of my first day in Colby, when Gus had told me why these are called the Blue Ridge Mountains. Sometimes it felt just like yesterday that I'd sat on the school bus with all those kids I didn't know, riding through this town and thinking every laundromat and trailer park and shabby little house along the way was the sorriest thing I'd ever seen. But now here I was, singing Bible school songs with my friend Howard and my arms wrapped around my very own dog. And when I looked out of that now familiar sights of Colby, I realized they didn't seem to look quite so sorry anymore. Bertha chattered away in the front seat the whole way to town while Gus nodded silently. We got ice cream at the Dairy Freeze and sat at the picnic table trying to eat it quick before the summer heat made it run down our cones and drip onto our laps. Bertha scooped a little bit into a paper cup for Wishbone, and Howard let him have the last bite of his cone. On the way home, me and Howard taught Gus and Bertha some of our Bible school songs, and then the best thing happened. I saw a yellow railroad car. That was on my list of things to wish on thanks to Fulton Banner, an a crazy old man who lived next door to us in Raleigh. Yellow railroad cars aren't too plentiful, he told me. When you see one, make a wish. For a minute, I thought I might not even bother making a wish. Maybe I was just wasting my time. But then something inside me told me not to give up and to keep on trying. I mean, you never know, right? So I looked back at that yellow railroad car as we passed it, and I made my wish. 28. And so the summer drifted by up there in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I was glad when Bible school was over and all I had to do was play cards on Howard's porch or take Wishbone down to the creek. Some days we rode our bikes to nowhere in particular, and every once in a while we sold vegetables and bread and butter pickles out of a wagon at the end of our driveway. Mrs. Odom taught me how to crochet and helped me make a scarf for Bertha. Gus took me fishing, and I even won a few Bible bucks in Sunday school. Jackie called every now and then. She had a new boyfriend named Jake who drove a motorcycle. Carol Lee's parents didn't like him. But who cares, she said. Not me. She didn't get the bank teller job she wanted, but she met some guy who needed a file clerk at his insurance agency, and then she could finally quit that Waffle House job. I got a few more letters from Scrappy. He didn't say much except, "It sure has been hot here lately," or "I'm getting fat eating jailhouse food, ha ha." I still made my wish every day because I decided I was not ready to give up yet. I wished on a butterfly that landed on me, on a camel-shaped cloud, on a cricket in the house, and a lightning bug glowing on my ring finger. I found another four-leaf clover and a penny in the parking lot, and one time we drove across the state line into Tennessee, which is good for wishing if you clap 3 times first. And then one day a lady from social services showed up at Gus and Bertha's house. She snooped around the house, her eyes flitting here and there, examining every little thing. She made a face at the cat hair on the couch and raised her eyebrows at those canning jars in my room. Bertha followed along behind her, chattering a mile a minute about what a big help I am around the house and how much I'd loved Vacation Bible School. Of course, she left out the parts about TJ Rainey and that dumb lunchbox note. And check out her dog, she said, nodding toward Wishbone, snoring at the back door. You wouldn't believe how she takes care of that dog. Feeds him, walks him, lets him sleep right on her pillow every night. That lady made another face and then asked if there was somewhere we could talk. Why don't we go out on the back porch? Bertha said. So we sat on the porch with the afternoon sun high above the mountains while that lady sat in Gus's chair and told us that the situation back in Raleigh had improved. I watched Bertha's face turn white and felt my stomach do a flip. Improved? That lady went on to tell us how Mama was doing better and trying harder and deserved a chance. She explained about how it was always best for children to live with their real parent, whenever possible, she added quickly. Then she blabbered on, but all I heard were words like Charlie's well-being and supervision and stable environment. Bertha kept pushing at her hair with a shaky hand and nodding, and then that lady said she would send someone to pick me up in a few weeks, and that was that. Believe me when I tell you, my head was spinning. Why was I feeling so scared? I sat there on that porch with confusion swirling around me like a swarm of angry bees. Shouldn't I be feeling happy? Hadn't I wanted to go back to Raleigh? Didn't I hate those hillbilly kids here in Colby? Didn't I want to get the heck out of this place where my only friend was an up-down boy and I slept on Cinderella pillowcases in a shabby old house hanging off the side of the mountain? And then I had a thought that made me jump up and run to the front door where Bertha was watching that lady's car disappear up the driveway. What about Wishbone? I hollered. Tell that lady I'm not leaving without Wishbone. Bertha swiped at her cheeks and pulled me to her and said the perfect Bertha thing. I will make things right for you, Charlie, she said. I promise. Chapter 29. The next day, Mama called. Bertha talked to her first, soft and low with her face toward the kitchen wall. I know, Carla, but think of Charlie. Not fair. Finally, she gave the phone to me. Hello, I said, and felt like a baby. Why couldn't I be strong and sassy mouthed like Jackie? Then Mama told me how she can't wait for me to come home, and she's been so lonely, and nobody understands what she's been going through. And Jackie thinks she's so gal darned grown up that she's not coming home, and that's fine by me, she said. After that, she started on Scrappy. What a no good nothing he is, and how he left her high and dry. Does anybody ever think about me? She said. I knew I wasn't really supposed to answer that, so I didn't. Scrappy got a tattoo of a blackbird in a cage on the back of his hand, I said. And guess what happened next? She hung up. Click. Just like that. What happened? Bertha asked. I shrugged. I guess she didn't want to hear about that tattoo. Bertha stood there slack-jawed, looking from me to the phone and then back to me. Maybe y'all just got disconnected, she said. I bet she'll call back. So we stood there staring at the phone while the refrigerator hummed and a cat purred beside us. But the phone didn't ring. Bertha shook her head. Nothing ever changes with her, she said. Carla, Carla, Carla. It's always about Carla. Then she grabbed me by the shoulders and said, I'm sorry, Charlie. I shouldn't have said that. It's okay. No, she said. No, it isn't. She's your mama. I wanted to ask Bertha if I really was going back to Raleigh, but I was scared to. Hadn't she said she would make things right? But what did that even mean anyway? I decided to walk down to the Odoms, hoping my swirling insides would settle down. I clipped Wishbone's leash on his collar and we set off down the road. I let him stop every now and then to sniff a tangle of weeds or inspect a tin can on the side of the road. My swirling stomach didn't settle down until the Odom's house came into view. Then, just the sight of it set things right again. That weed-filled yard was littered with balls and tools and shoes. Burl's legs stuck out from under his truck in the driveway. Music from a radio drifted out of the Odom's shop in the garage. Cotton was lining up bricks along the edge of the road, and Lenny was swinging a baseball bat at rocks that hit the road sign with a clang. And then there was Howard, working on a crossword puzzle on the steps. By the time I got to the front porch, Mrs. Odom was already out of the door giving Wishbone a piece of cheese. I sat on the steps for a while, not talking, watching Howard working on his puzzle. The thing about Howard was, you could be with him and talk, or you could be with him and not talk. He liked you either way. We went inside to play Monopoly, which I personally think is boring, but Howard likes it. Wishbone got mud on the floor, but Mrs. Odom didn't even care. She brought us orange jello and coffee mugs and let Cotton jump on the couch. I kept trying to make myself tell Howard about that squinty-eyed social lady and how the situation at home had improved. I wanted to put a smile on my face and take a deep breath and say, "Guess what? I'm going back to Raleigh." But I just sat there eating orange jello while Howard put another hotel on Boardwalk. Jackie called that night and told me she couldn't wait to see me again. She told me her new boyfriend Jake would take me for a ride on his motorcycle and she could put blue streaks in my hair if I wanted. And I'm finally getting my very own apartment, Charlie, so you can have the bedroom all to yourself and I don't want to go back to Raleigh, I said. Silence. I said, "I don't want to go back to Raleigh," I hollered. How come? "'Cause I want to stay here in Colby." "But I thought you wanted to come back." Jackie let out a big, heavy sigh, and then she started with, "I told you this, and I told you that." And what could I do but agree with her? She had told me all that. How I had Gus and Bertha treating me like a princess, and those good-hearted Odoms thanking the good Lord for me at the supper table. How Howard was the nicest friend I could ever want. How I had these beautiful mountains and that little porch under the stars. I just hadn't seen all those things until now. I'd been so busy making my wish that I hadn't seen things the way they really were. "But Bertha's going to make things right," I told Jackie. "What do you mean?" she said. "I'm not sure." Then she said she'd call again later, and I went to bed with my stomach so tangled up in knots I couldn't sleep. I laid my cheek against Wishbone's warm side and listened to his slow, steady breathing. I couldn't even think about that clotheslines of troubles. Shoot, I had so many troubles that line was liable to fall right over. Chapter 30. The next day, Mama called again. I could hear her voice clear across the kitchen while she talked to Bertha, loud and fast. Bertha kept saying, "Slow down, Carla," and "What are you talking about?" Then she said, "Wait, what? Chattanooga? With who? For how long?" Bertha kept shaking her head and her face got redder by the minute. Then she hollered, "What about Charlie? You know, your daughter?" Bertha almost never got mad about anything more than a cat bringing a mouse inside, so it was a bit of a shock to hear her yelling like that. But then it got worse. She lit into Mama telling her how she needed to get a hold of herself and act like a mother, how she needed to think about somebody besides herself sometimes. "So you're just going to waltz on up to Chattanooga and come back and be a mother when you're good and ready? Is that it, Carla?" And then Bertha was staring at the phone in her hand, and the silence on the other end felt heavy and sad there in that little kitchen. "Am I going back to Raleigh?" popped out of my mouth when I wasn't even expecting it to. "No, you aren't," Bertha said. Then she told me she had some calls to make and I should go to Howard's. I told Howard everything, starting with that squinty-eyed social service lady telling us how the situation in Raleigh had improved, and ending with Bertha saying, "No, you aren't." And when I was done, he said, "Ain't Bertha the best?" And wasn't that so like Howard, finding the only good part when things are bad? I wondered what he thought about a mama who just waltzes up to Chattanooga instead of making orange jello and coffee mugs. For a minute, I even wondered if he still wanted to be my friend, knowing my family was all broken up like it was. But that thought flew right out of my mind when he said, "Let's build a fort." So we spent the afternoon in the Odom's dusty, ramshackle garage, searching for stuff to make a fort with. Scraps of wood, a warped table with no legs, a rusty stop sign riddled with bullet holes. Cotton kept following us around, saying, "What about this?" and holding up something dumb like a broken hamster cage or an empty paint can. Wishbone liked to went went crazy sniffing around for mice and chipmunks or whatever else might have been in that garage, chewing on bags of birdseed or nesting in a busted radiator. Lenny and Burl helped us drag everything to the woods at the edge of the yard, and then Howard wanted to sit on the porch and draw a plan for the fort. Me, I'd just dive right in, but not Howard. He was a planner. He went worked on our fort for a while, but it was too hot, so we went inside and laid on the living room floor in front of the fan. I stared up at the water-stained ceiling and said, "I hope I don't have to go back to Raleigh." My voice came out all quivery, and I had to swallow hard to keep the tears from coming. I hoped Howard wouldn't say, "I thought you wanted to go back to Raleigh." He didn't. He said, "You're not." How do you know? I just know. He said that so firm that and sure that I felt better right away. After a while, Mrs. Odom came in and told me Bertha had called and that I should go home. So I tied Wishbone's leash to Lenny's bike and headed off up the road with my stomach starting that familiar swirl again. What if Bertha hadn't been able to make things right for me after all? Ooh, I wonder what's going to happen. Chapter 31. When I got back, Gus was home from work, sitting in a lawn chair, dunking turnip greens in a bucket of water. "Hey there, Butterbean," he called out when he saw me. Wishbone slurped up some of that sandy turnip green water, and me and Gus laughed. Bertha's cat, named Lula May, sauntered over and rubbed her head against Wishbone's leg. He gave me a mournful look, but he let her do it. Later, while Bertha put turnip greens and cornbread and tuna casserole on the table, she told me we would talk about everything after supper. I didn't know what talk about everything meant, so I just said okay, but inside I felt scared. I pushed tuna casserole around on my plate and didn't say much while Bertha told us about some friend of hers whose son ran off and joined the army. "Honest to goodness," she said, "the way she keeps crying and carrying on, you'd think he jumped off a cliff." After supper, I helped her clear the table, and then we went out on the porch to eat peaches with vanilla ice cream. I watched the lightning bugs twinkle down below and waited for us to talk about everything. Finally, Bertha started. "So, Charlie," she said, "I talked to social services today and told them I didn't think your situation at home has improved. After all, I told them I thought maybe they'd made a mistake." "You did?" "I did." Then she told me how they agreed to check on things. She repeated some of those social service kinds of words like reevaluate and stable environment. "They promised they would get back to me in a few days," Bertha said. Well, let me tell you, those few days felt like a few years to me. Worry followed me every minute, making my insides flop around and my heart beat like crazy. Howard kept saying, "Trust me, you're not going back to Raleigh." But when I asked him how he knew that, he said, "I can't tell you, just trust me." I wanted to trust him more than anything, but that wall of worry in my stomach just wouldn't go away. And then, of course, laying in bed with Wishbone snoring beside me, I couldn't stop thinking about how wrong I'd been about everything here in Colby, how I hadn't seen all the good things Jackie saw right away. And then I found myself wanting to be more like Jackie again, and Howard, too, both of them always seeing the good in things. I put my head on Wishbone's warm side and made a promise to myself right there in that little room of mine. No matter how things turned out, I was going to try to see the good in things, like Jackie and Howard. I knew I'd probably always have to say pineapple once in a while on account of Scrappy's temper that I have. But who knows? If I tried hard enough, maybe someday somebody might even call me good hearted. Those few days dragged on, and every little thing I looked at nearly turned me into a crying baby, thinking I might be leaving. Bertha stirring grits by the stove with a cat at her feet, Gus out in the garden in his greasy baseball cap, picking nasty green worms off the tomato plants. Even the shed and the porch and the lawn chairs and the canning jars lined up on that shelf in my room made me sad. I tried to stay busy at Howard's, but then being at the Odoms like to broke my heart. That ratty old couch on the porch, the yard full of bicycles and balls and dirty sneakers, and of course Howard studying his fort plans like he was building a castle, then heading out to the edge of the yard with that up-down walk of his. Finally, after a few days, the kitchen phone rang while me and Bertha were out on the porch eating egg salad sandwiches for lunch. She answered it and talked for a while, and then she came back out. The look on her face told me something good was about to happen. "How would you like to stay here with me and Gus, Charlie?" she said. My heart nearly leaped right out of my chest. "Stay?" I said. Bertha nodded. "Stay." "For how long?" Then Bertha said almost the exact same words that Jackie had said on her last night in my room about Scrappy, how Scrappy was going to keep on being Scrappy and Mama was going to keep on being Mama. And then she told me as long as she had a breath in her body, she was going to make things right for me. I wanted to jump up and down and pump my fist and let out a cheer that would echo across the valley below. I wanted to spread my arms like wings and fly right off that porch and out over the treetops and up into the clouds. I wanted to dance with Wishbone and then race down to Howard's to tell him this news. But what I did first was hug Bertha. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "I would like to stay with you and Gus." I hugged her one more time and added, "I would like that a lot." Bertha looked at me all teary eyed and said, "Guess what I'm doing first thing tomorrow?" "What?" "I'm getting single one of those dang canning jars out of your room." We laughed and I asked if I could go tell Howard the news. So me and Wishbone raced down to the Odoms and up on the porch steps. I banged on the screen door hollering, "Guess what, y'all?" I didn't even wait for anybody to come to the door. I burst right into their living room, which I know was not a very nice thing to do, but I couldn't help myself. Howard jumped up from the couch and Mrs. Odom came running in from the kitchen and I said, "I'm staying here. I'm not going back to Raleigh." Mrs. Odom hugged me and told me that was the best news ever, but Howard just said, "Told ya." Then he gave Wishbone half a vanilla wafer and said, "I knew you were staying here." "But how did you know?" I asked. "'Cause that was the other part of my wish," he said. "That day at the creek, I wished that you would be my friend and stay here in Colby." "You did?" He nodded. "Yep. And since the part about being my friend came true, I knew the other part would too. But I couldn't tell you because of that rule. You know that you can't tell your wish to anybody or it won't come true. Well, didn't that just beat all? Howard making a wish like that. On my way home, I thought about how I'd made my wish so many times and it hadn't come true. And there was Howard getting his wish on the very first try. Still, my heart felt light as a feather, and as I turned up the gravel driveway toward Gus and Bertha's, that night after supper we sat out on the porch and ate blackberry cobbler and listened to Bertha's stories. "And then," she said, "one time we ran out of gas in the middle of nowhere with 3 cats in the car. Remember that, Gus?" He nodded and said, "Yep." Then Bertha let out a big contented sigh and said, "I never in my wildest dreams would have thought we'd have a family like this. Would you, Gus?" A family like this? Is that what she'd said? She had said that. A family. A real family. A family that cared about me and called me Butterbean, and was going to take the canning jars out of my room first thing tomorrow. A family that wasn't broken. A family that I'd been wishing for all those times. There was her wish. I couldn't hardly wait till Sunday when I could find my flower in the garden of blessings and write "My family" on it. Suddenly, Bertha called out, "Star, first star, everybody make a wish." I looked up at that star twinkling over the mountains, but instead of wishing, I just closed my eyes and breathed in the piney air. My wish had finally come true. The end. So I hope you guys loved this book as much as I do.